Spoilers, you've been warned. They messed it up! They messed it up again! I actually believe they'd fixed all the messes from episode 1 and 2, and I was wrong. They made more, they doubled down, and it's gotten bad. This show is not good anymore. This video will hopefully help you guys understand what went wrong in episode 3 and 4 and how it messes up the entire show. I'm going to be breaking down episode 3 and episode 4 separately, so if you're here for episode 4, skip to this timestamp. However, stick here if you want to hear me go over episode 3 as well, because there's issues there too. Not nearly as much as episode 4, but God, you're in for a treat. Now, episode 3 starts off with Obi-Wan having a vision. He's hearing the voices from the previous episode, Reva. He's hearing quotes from Vader / Anakin. Qui-Gon and Yoda can also be heard. Obi-Wan also tries to communicate with Qui-Gon. It doesn't exactly go very well. All while Vader's getting his suit put on, and then lo and behold, it's done and you hear him breathe. At this point you then see Mustafar. That's where Vader's castle is. He's having a conversation with Reva about how the Grand Inquisitor means nothing, and this is very interesting. It's almost as if they're trying to brush over the fact that the Grand Inquisitor died and that he's meant to be alive in 5 years in Star Wars Rebels, but I guess they're just going to pretend that never happened now. Like I said, I hope he's still alive because otherwise that breaks their own canon, and whilst I don't care for Disney, you don't get to just break canon willy-nilly. How are people meant to be immersed in your series if you're just going to continue to break things that are already established? All this will do is take people out of it, like what happened to me, and we will no longer take the BS. We'll start to see through it. And then you have people like me breaking your crap down. Anyway, Kenobi is the main target, as Vader says. However, if Reva does a good job in finding him and getting him captured, Reva will be promoted to Grand Inquisitor. But if she fails, Vader will kill her. Then we go to the next scene where Obi-Wan fixes Lola, Leia's droid. He explains about how the Force is like turning on the lights and now feeling safe. It's quite wholesome, but when you open up your mind to the actual fact that he's meant to be disconnected from the Force and continues to be able to have the Force when the plot demands it, and then struggles or loses the ability to use the Force when you should logically be able to use it, I struggle to take this seriously. And if you don't believe me, just wait until later on in the episode, it will all make sense. Eventually, Kenobi and Leia land on the planet. Kenobi explains to Leia how the Empire has been ravaging planets like the one that they are on, and Leia, who's meant to be smart every now and then, starts being naive and is like, I thought the Empire were meant to be helping people. And this is where you start to see the major issues with Leia and her inconsistencies in regards to her being some child prodigy and then being a normal naive child. They keep switching between these two things when they feel like it in the writing. It's not consistent. And in the scene after the one I'm about to cover, you'll start to understand why. So in the next scene, you see the third sister arrive at the Inquisitor's home base. They have unnecessarily dramatic music that just doesn't make sense for the scene, but that's a superficial thing. What does bother me is that, despite the fact that they have a couple TIE fighters in the hangar and other defenses like stormtroopers walking around, but this base, which is meant to be one of the most important bases in the Empire's arsenal, has no major defenses like turbo lasers or turrets or anything. It's almost as if that's going to be important later on. So Reva arrives in the meeting room. The fifth brother and the fourth sister are also there. Reva knows where Leia and Obi-Wan are going because she looked at the manifest. There's also unnecessary drama between the fifth brother and the third sister, Reva in other words. And the fourth sister is just there, like a plank almost. But the fifth brother and the third sister keep arguing about who's going to be Grand Inquisitor, basically. And it all just amounts to Reva then saying, Vader told me, and then everyone else just going, okay, we'll do it, under your command. And then reluctantly going ahead to launch the probes to go and find out where Kenobi is. So, back on Mapuzo, the planet that Obi-Wan and Leia are on, Obi-Wan goes over the fact that they're meant to be farmers from Taul, only to then realise that they've arrived at the location and no one is there to pick them up. Obi-Wan, being the pessimist he's now become, says no one is coming, which then triggers Leia to be naive again and flag down a driver that's coming past in a truck. And Leia, who you think would have learned from her past mistakes of not trusting Kenobi, ignores Kenobi to then get on the vehicle owned by Freck, and then wants to get on the vehicle despite the fact that Obi-Wan said that they just want directions to the nearest port. I guess you forgot what Obi-Wan said in the previous scene that they were in about the Empire ravaging planets and not being all that good. Especially when on the back of the truck there's an Empire flag. What's even more interesting is when Freck picks up 4 stormtroopers and they get on, and after having a back and forward, Kenobi accidentally calls Leia by her actual name, instead of Luma, you know, the name that he's been harping on about that Leia should be identifying as. Yes, we needed more character assassinations in Star Wars. Now we have it for bloody Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hello there.
Kenobi! And what's even worse is that the bloody stormtroopers say he called her Leia, you know, Leia, the name of the princess that they're meant to be looking for. And they buy his bluff instead of just supporting him straight there. But what's really, really unapologetic is the fact that Obi-Wan and Leia are talking in earshot of Freck about what they're going through. To the point where he calls her Leia, as Freck is literally within a meter of them, driving, albeit. But these aren't bloody Honda CRVs. They don't have a massive engine. These are hover trucks. They're not that loud. So Freck would hear them talking about this. On top of that, there's the stuff about Leia saying, you knew her, because he said to the stormtroopers earlier that when I see her mother in her. That was the bluff I mentioned. Leia picks up on this and assumes that he must know Padme. So I guess Leia's super smart again. But the funny thing is that Leia's like, are you my real father? And then he actually goes as far to say, I wish I was. So I guess that theory about Padme and Obi-Wan doing the dirty, especially after Satine died, is potentially true. And Anakin was right to have fears. Liar! This entire scene on the truck was the first major downhill moment of this entire show. And it does not stop here. Because after a conversation about Obi-Wan being a Jedi and how he lost communication with his parents and brother, because, you know, the Jedi kidnap children. All while Freck is still within a meter of them, they eventually arrive at a checkpoint. Freck then tells the stormtroopers at the checkpoint that he found a couple strays and they might be a little bit suspicious, so they should check them out. This then leads to the most contrived point of this entire episode. Obi-Wan, who has been out of combat for probably about 10 years, who's been disconnected from the Force for 10 years, is somehow able to take out the Force stormtroopers as if he's back in the Clone Wars. Right after taking out the probe that the stormtroopers called, which he waited long enough to identify him as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then, instead of walking around the fence, he shoots out the bloody control panel for the fence to run through it, not to drive Freck's vehicle through, because he might need that to get out of there. He runs through it instead of going around it, which then allows him to be surrounded by 3 stormtroopers who come out of a carrier, led by Oberyn's paramour from Game of Thrones, who then shoots the 3 stormtroopers. Turns out she was the contact who was meant to save them, and she was running late, like Leia said. And I ignored the fact that when Obi-Wan went on the ground, despite the fact that he took out the other 4 stormtroopers with little to no issue, he goes down whilst aiming his gun towards the stormtroopers. And the stormtroopers don't react to that. So essentially, Obi-Wan and Leia are saved by a Deus Ex Machina. Trust me, this won't be the first time. But let me bring out one small issue that's outside of the writing. The direction. And I guess the cinematography too. When Oberyn's wife starts shooting the stormtroopers, there's a very, very bad cut. You hear her fire 4 shots, despite the fact that there are 3 stormtroopers. You would not be mistaken for thinking that, she probably just double tapped one of them. She didn't. It repeated the 4th shot. And thinking about it, maybe it's an editorial issue, not just cinematography and direction. But you literally see her aim towards the trooper on the right and shoot, and then the shot cuts to another angle where she does exactly the same thing to shoot the 4th shot, which is basically the 3rd shot, at the 3rd stormtrooper. This is not something you should be seeing in Hollywood level Disney tier productions. This is an amateur mistake that I don't even see independent and AA productions making. And let me remind you, the budget per episode for this show is $25 million. Let that sink in. $25 million, and there are rookie errors in this production.
Say what?
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Shameful display!
Anyway, thanks to the probe that Reva told them to send out, the Inquisitors are now aware of what's happening. I don't care for the bickering between the 5th brother and Reva, so we'll skip over it. This is not their show. If they wanted to do an anthology-style show similar to that of the Clone Wars, they shouldn't have named it Kenobi. Back in Mapuzo, Leia's freaking out, saying that she didn't want to run away, blah 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 blah. Oberyn's paramour brings them into a safe house. It's called The Path, and it's been used as like an underground railroad to help escaping Jedi and other fugitives get away from the Empire. It takes them to Jabim, and you even get a name drop in the form of Quinlan Vos. Now, for those of you who haven't watched that one scene in Phantom Menace, or heard the name drop in Revenge of the Sith, or who haven't seen the Clone Wars, or the Dark Disciple book, you know, the one that was about Ventress and Quinlan Vos, that they ripped from the Clone Wars because they cancelled it, thank you Disney. He is a well-known Jedi Master who usually went undercover. He has the ability to read things, history from just touching him, similar to the guy from Jedi Fallen Order, Cal Kestis. Now, despite the fact that Oberyn's paramour said that no one comes in here, 2 stormtroopers coming looking, and there's a very forced, unnecessary tension scene between the loader droid and the two stormtroopers until one of them says that it's the loader droid and they can't communicate. But bear in mind, behind the stormtroopers, it's like midday. Keep that in mind. The sun is blazing down like it's Tatooine and it's midday. But not 1 minute later, Obi-Wan starts feeling something in the Force, a disturbance. And then suddenly, he goes to the window and it's pitch bloody black. Not 1 minute has gone past. And then you start seeing the Inquisitors and a couple more stormtroopers marching in. Followed by Vader. Is the dark side that strong now? So yeah, Vader's walking through the town until he stops. He stops breathing. This is the one time they actually care about his breathing stopping in convenient times, such as when he's talking or thinking or doing something. They don't ever respect that throughout the show because he breathes when he's talking constantly, something they didn't do in Rogue One, hence why I liked Vader's portrayal in that. And even in Star Wars Rebels. And then, to antagonize Obi-Wan and draw him out, he starts force choking people like it's nothing. He kills a kid by snapping his neck, drags women through the dirt.
And not just the men, but the women and the children too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them!
And whilst I'm happy that they are finally using the Force like they have done in all the other media, like in the Clone Wars or Rebels, actually lifting people up as they force choke people, Tala, Oberyn's paramour, he tells her to take Leia to Alderaan and go, and that he will lead them away. She doesn't follow this, and you'll see later on when I explain it. But let's get back to the presents. Obi-Wan's run outside the town, or the village, or whatever. Vader, sensing him, goes in that direction. And as Kenobi is wandering around next to the sand...
I don't like sand.
Vader ignites his lightsaber out of nowhere. Standing off. The moment we've been waiting for. Obi-Wan takes out his lightsaber and runs. Now I get it, maybe that's an adequate response to someone who sees some massive bloke in a suit with a red lightsaber, but this is Obi-Wan who killed the first Sith Lord seen in 1,000 years. Now you mean to tell me that he's become the biggest coward since Fritar?
A shameful display!
Vader literally manhandles him. It's well done. How it's done, I get it, Obi-Wan's rusty. They do it well. He's fearful. The person who you built up and then failed and then made into this creature, this Dark Lord, it will terrify you, especially when he says, I am what you made me, to Kenobi. But then Vader does some dumb shit. But not before Tala breaks the promise he made to Kenobi to get Leia to Alderaan. She runs back, which is going to be very necessary in the next bit, leaving Leia alone to go through the tunnels to go to the pilot to go to Alderaan. And then Reva goes into the safe house. You know, the safe house that's meant to probably have one tunnel that leads to the place where the pilot is. This is as Tala's meant to be running through this way to go and save Kenobi later on down the line, and they don't bump into each other. At this same time, Vader stops playing with his food and then chases Kenobi to the place where the refinery is. He uses the Force to pull down whatever the hell the rocks are that they're meant to be mining on this planet, so he can light them aflame with his lightsaber whilst holding Kenobi in the air because Kenobi's forgot the abilities to repulse out of someone's Force grab. And then Vader pulls him into the fire so he can suffer as he suffered, burning Kenobi's arm and sides. And then Force pushes Kenobi back out the fire, extinguishing most of the fire, mind you. Keep that in mind, because when Tala comes back, she shoots one of the stormtroopers that Vader told to go and get Kenobi, you know, despite the fact that he can lift people up with the Force. And then Vader doesn't look at anywhere else but Kenobi. The stormtroopers are looking all the way around, apart from where Tala actually is. Vader's just standing there like,
Must have been the wind.
Until Tala shoots the fuel, lighting it again, which actually makes Vader, as well as the stormtroopers, move back. And Vader then watches as the droid picks up Kenobi and takes him back, and then walks away. Vader has been waiting 10 years for this, and he lets Kenobi get away. And you know what the icing on the cake is? Reva killed the pilot somehow, and then captures Leia. Meanwhile, the tunnel's pretty long. It took Leia about 10 minutes to walk through that. Tala was also able to escape, mind you. And then she gets Leia. She's on the other side where the pilot's ship is, mind you. She killed the pilot, and she's there. Do they have no respect for continuity? Do they not have a timeline? How is it possible for Reva, who only arrived at the tunnel 2 minutes ago, to already be at the pilot's location despite the fact that Tala went back and Leia was walking through the tunnel this entire time? Running, even. This destroys this episode. It destroys the damn show alone. And I haven't even gotten to episode 4 yet. Objectively, this episode is a 3.5 out of 10, and I like it even less. Probably a 2. I like this episode starting, and it just got worse as it kept on going. It's terrible, and it doesn't get better. Right, now I'm going to do episode 4, and you're in for a bloody treat here. The episode starts with Obi-Wan getting some juicy Bacta on the planet Jabeam, while at the same time, Vader's also in his Bacta tank. They're having some linked vision, while reminiscing about their fight. Obi-Wan's hearing Vader's voice. Then he wakes up and tries to climb up the Bacta tank. Tala is there telling him that he still needs to heal. Keep that in mind. He's still incredibly injured. I'm sure that they will respect that throughout this episode. Meanwhile, at the Inquisitor's home base, Leia has been imprisoned by Reva. Reva then tells Leia that Obi-Wan is dead, meaning that Leia now knows that Obi-Wan and Ben Kenobi are the same, despite the fact that there's no implication of this seen in A New Hope. That's definitely not a plot hole. Back on Jabeam, Tala and the supposed injured Obi-Wan Kenobi are trying to convince a pilot called Roken to help rescue Leia from the Inquisitor's base. Obi-Wan then says you have no idea what the Empire is capable of, to which Roken starts going on a massive rant about how he was married to someone who was Force sensitive and the Inquisitors got her, so he understands exactly what they are capable of. And then he says okay. That was necessary. So then they go to the briefing area. Turns out they got information on the base whilst it was being built. It's in the Mustafar system. It's the water moon. Vader is not there. He's on his ship, probably in his Bacta tank. Because for you lore nerds out there like myself, he needs to go in the Bacta tank because it's the only time he feels not in pain constantly. Then someone who's called Wade, who would definitely be important later on, says, so that's it. Fortress Inquisitorius, that's a name drop. You've probably heard this if you've played Jedi Fallen Order. And then the female pilot then says, it's impenetrable, Wade. Yes, this base that has no turbo laser defenses is impenetrable. No shields is impenetrable. Not even a hangar door is impenetrable. Keep that in mind. This is meant to be impenetrable. Kenobi then says, I don't see any shields. Wade then responds by saying, no one will be stupid enough to attack them. But I thought this was impenetrable. The script is now contradicting itself. This is going well, isn't it? Anyway, Obi-Wan mentions that there's some T-47 speeders in there. In other words, the snow speeders from Empire Strikes Back. The pilots then keep fighting back saying that it's suicide to go in there. To which Obi-Wan says, I will go in there myself, and then Tala, being virtuous, says I will go along with him as I have officer clearance. I assume that she's probably feeling guilty because she didn't follow Kenobi's promise to stay with Leia and take her to Alderaan. But the plot demands it. Fast forward to Tala's ship. They are approaching the planet. Kenobi is struggling to use the Force. Keep that in mind. He can't lift up a little bloody box or whatever it is. Tala, seeing this, says that your body's not the only thing that needs to heal. The past is a hard thing to forget, and he just needs time. And Kenobi's like, some things just can't be forgotten. You mean like the Force? Can the Force be forgotten? Don't worry. This will be important later. Back on Fortress Inquisitorius, Reva is interrogating Leia. Reva is grilling Leia about some transmission that was reported about a year ago on a planet called Baonab. She's referencing the path. Reva thinks that Leia knows where the other locations of the path are, going as far as to slam down a piece of wood with the Jedi sign on it, the same one that was seen in the safe house in the last episode. Leia ignores this and goes straight to asking Reva about how Obi-Wan died. Reva then tells her that he burnt to death on Mapuzo. Reva then says that the people that she's looking for left Obi-Wan to die. Reva then says if you help us find them, you get to go home to your family. Now, this is a decent interrogation tactic for children, but as we know, Leia's intelligence and naivety is inconsistent in this show. She denies knowing anything about the path. Outside Fortress Inquisitorius, Tala does the melodramatic march through there with the stupid music again like in the last episode with Reva. Though this time she's stopped by a security officer who wants to see her papers. But then there's this unnecessary tension scene where you think that Tala's not going to be able to go through, and then she's like, is there a problem? And then she grills the security officer because she's a high rank. Despite the fact that he's head of security and has all the power in that situation. She brags that she has information to give to the Grand Inquisitor, and do you want to be responsible for that situation when I tell the Grand Inquisitor that you prevented me from giving him powerful information? So he then cowers and lets her through. Yay, that's how security works. And I have no idea why he doesn't go, oh, sorry, ma'am or sir, let me contact the Grand Inquisitor right now so that he can come up and talk to you right here. If the Empire's meant to be so fearful, then don't you think that the people who are inside of it would have some level of intelligence to inspire that fear? There is none here. And this is a trope that's been seen throughout Star Wars, less so in the original trilogy. God, they keep making it worse. They keep making it worse with each expanded media they make for this damn franchise. Anyway, Tala then goes into a security terminal next to several other soldiers and officers who are all in earshot. Keep that in mind. Because this girl just starts talking as if it's nothing right next to them. She says to Obi-Wan that she's inside. Then you see Obi-Wan swimming into the base. A stormtrooper standing by the gates hears Obi-Wan coming up through the water. He walks in there and triggers the stealth game section as he chokes out the trooper and throws him into the water. Then we cut to Reva, who is now force probing the mind of Princess Leia. Leia, as we already know, is resistant to force manipulation, so she resists the probe. Reva is impressed, and as Lola, the droid that Leia owns, starts to fly about, Reva force pulls it towards her hand, and then starts to go on about how she used to have a droid when she was her age. It was taken from her like everything else. Good old fear manipulation tactics. In the next scene, Tala is like, what is kept down here? And the other trooper or officer hears this and they have an awkward exchange of looks. So at least they're respecting proximity here, but at no point does this guy have any suspicions about, this person was suspicious. Officer, there's a woman here who's acting suspicious. Take her to interrogation. Meanwhile, she's still directing Kenobi through the base. It's literally like bloody Grimm's daughter and Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell right now. It's kind of hilarious. But then eventually an officer, who's the same rank as her, does his job and asks for some more identification. Because, you know, it's not her station. Why is she there? So I'll commend them for that. But as you see the establishing shot where you see the officer and Tala walking away to a dark corner, which will be important later on, the trooper that gave her the awkward look in the previous scene is nowhere to be seen. So we're left to either assume that he was one who told the officer that Tala was acting a bit sus, or they just removed him from the shot. Breaking continuity. Again. Then as Obi-Wan starts calling Tala's name on the comlink, you see the comlink on the desk near all the other officers talking on loudspeaker as you see Tala beat the crap out of the officer that was telling her to come and identify herself. So that means that they are talking out loud in this. And none of them think, maybe we should turn the volume down or maybe put this on the earpiece? So, you know, the other stormtroopers and officers don't hear us communicating about the prison break that we are doing. And after Tala incapacitates the other officer, she picks up the comlink and shouts Ben on the bloody comlink, which triggers two stormtroopers that Obi-Wan is hiding from to hear. And they look everywhere else but the bloody vent compartment thing that Obi-Wan is in. And then Obi-Wan, who's meant to be disconnected from the Force and is struggling to use it, somehow uses the Force to bloody bang on the door, which triggers the stormtroopers to run out the room looking for whoever made a sound. I didn't realize we were playing Jedi Academy, but there's no common sense here. This isn't a 2002 video game. How are these stormtroopers lacking the intelligence to bloody see him? And I even forgot the big major issue with this entire scene with the two stormtroopers. After Obi-Wan escapes the Seeker droid that meticulously looks through the window of the door and shines its light because you have to see that he's focusing as a droid, you then see two stormtroopers walking in shot, and as they are seen walking in the direction that Kenobi is in, literally about 3 meters away, you can see Kenobi's foot go up the damn vent shaft thing. So they would have seen him. What? I have never seen direction, cinematography, and even editing done so badly in my life. Actually, that's not true. Batwoman was a thing. But just this stuff alone just exposes how terrible this is. And the fact that he can't use the Force to pick up a little bloody block or whatever it is, but he can use the Force to touch something as a distraction that's not even in earshot or eye view of his location. It just doesn't make sense. You tell me that he's regained his Force abilities from swimming in the ocean now? Come on! Then you see Tala back at the bloody station saying that I had company. And then you see that there's an officer literally 2 meters in front who didn't hear any of the fighting or commotion going on literally 10 meters away from them in the shadows. Anyway, we go back to Leia and Reva, which is oddly enough the less egregious thing that's happening. And I'll commend Moses Ingram, and the actress that plays Leia right here has been probably one of the better actors in this entire show, oddly enough. A child is doing better. Then again, maybe it's just that they're better directed here. I don't know. I wasn't on set here. That's why I can talk freely about this show, because I never signed an NDA for this, so I can speak completely free about its production. But this means I have no inside knowledge, sods, so I'm going based off of hearsay. When Reva thinks that she's got Leia under her grasp, Leia then brings up that she'll have to tell her father before she exposes anything. and Reva sees through it. Reva then tells the stormtroopers to take her to the torture room. I hope you like pain. Well, I don't, and this show is painful. Oh. Obi-Wan then finds out what they've been hiding here, and says it isn't a fortress, it's a tomb, as he looks at Jedi Master Tera Kenobi, the Jedi Master that helped Ahsoka Tano in the Clone Wars find her lightsaber. It's a nice little throwback, but it can't save the show. After seeing a bunch of nameless Jedi, you also see a Jedi youngling who was probably taken from the temple during Order 66. Meanwhile, Reva is about to torture Leia. Obi-Wan hears this through the Force and then says, with no information or context, I need a distraction. And spoiler alert for Game of Thrones, skip ahead by 20 seconds if you don't want to hear it, I got flashbacks to the scene where Shireen Baratheon gets burnt at the stake by Melisandre as Stannis and his wife watches. I commend the child actress for her portrayal in this show, because bloody hell, she's the saving grace of this entire production. My god. And I'll commend Moses Ingram, she's also doing a good job here too. But she's not stealing the show. And then an officer who's probably higher ranked than Tala walks in to say, I was told it cannot wait, saving Leia and opening a bunch of questions as to how did Tala know exactly who to call to stop the torture as a distraction. Reva and Tala have an exchange. Turns out that Tala knows exactly what to say. It's regarding the path. Which means that in the time that Kenobi heard the voices and told Tala that he needs a distraction, Tala was able to somehow get a word to the third sister, Reva, that a conversation needs to be had about the path. I do not buy this, and the timeline does not make sense, but you know what, this is the least egregious, I'll suspend my disbelief. Tala tells Reva that she was stationed on Mapuzo. Reva recognizes her qualifications for discharge. I assume this means that she's the one who recognizes who is a rebel or an insurgent or an imposter or whatever, and she selects them to be taken away. So in other words, she's a double agent. Instead of saying Jabin, Tala says that they are on Florum. Now, for those of you who haven't watched the Clone Wars, Florum is a system or planet where the pirate Hondo Ohnaka bases his pirate gang off of. Hondo is connected to more elements of the Star Wars franchise than most people realize. He's a major focal point in the Galaxy's Edge theme park that Disney made. But in regards to the actual story of Star Wars, he was friends with Jango Fett, Boba Fett's father. He used to date the bounty hunter Aurra Sing. He smuggled weapons onto Onderon for Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker to help Ahsoka Tano help the Onderon rebels, who were at the time led by Saw Gerrera, his sister, and Ahsoka Tano's crush, Lux Bonteri. He not only captured Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker themselves, but even Count Dooku, hence why Dooku wiped out most of his pirate ring, using General Grievous. And before the Shadow Collective, Darth Maul worked with Hondo Ohnaka, and later sided with Obi-Wan in defeating him and his brother Savage Opress, who had just killed Jedi Master Adi Gallia. And he even attacked the ship that was used to get the Jedi younglings their lightsaber crystals from Ilum. And considering that one of the younglings from the Clone Wars arc that I'm referencing right now appears in the trailer for Bad Batch Season 2, I imagine we could be seeing a non-theme park version of a live-action Hondo Ohnaka, which will make Maya the Bubbly One very happy, as that's her favourite character. And then add to the fact that Hondo Ohnaka and Obi-Wan had this weird friendship as well. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him in the show. But then ask yourself this, do we really need to see another legacy character destroyed by Disney's Star Wars? Back to the scene with Reva and Tala. Tala says that the network runs out of the Surtar sector. Reva does not buy any of what she's saying and assumes that she's actually a spy, to which Tala says, I am, but for the other side. But then we switch back to the torture room where Leia is still trapped and two stormtroopers are guarding, and then the lights go off. And then suddenly we get a less interesting version of that Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2 trailer scene, where Obi-Wan is in the darkness and brings out his lightsaber to kill the stormtroopers majestically. Yes, let's bring back more things from the cancelled Legends continuity. You know, the one that you decanonized. Kenobi rescues Leia. Come with me if you want to live. As Reva is grilling Tara for being a liar, Kenobi and Leia get spotted by a Seeker droid. And as Reva tells the troopers to take her to detention for interrogation, the alarm is sounded. And the officer who said that he couldn't wait earlier touches her comlink and says, it's him. So you mean to tell me that she was able to listen to something in her ears and automatically know it was Kenobi without the audio playing out loud? So why didn't Kenobi and Tala do this earlier? Oh, I know why. Plot. And instead of putting two and two together and assuming that Tala and Kenobi must be working together, Reva then becomes dumb and then walks away. Bad guys love just walking away from obvious targets, don't they? First Vader and now Reva. And then as Obi-Wan and Leia are running away from the Seekers and I'm assuming stormtroopers, Obi-Wan calls Tala on the comlink to say that their cover's blown and that they're in the open. And to keep continuity for once, it's heard out loud by the stormtroopers, which means that throughout that entire conversation, the comlink was out loud, which means that Reva and the officers and the stormtroopers could have potentially heard Kenobi this entire time. And just conveniently, when Reva has walked away to go and find Kenobi, does he now talk and it's heard out loud. So imagine if Kenobi had just said something like 10 seconds earlier, it would have been heard by Reva, the Inquisitor, blowing her cover. Are you serious? And you may think that this is the dumbest moment of the entire episode. Trust me, it is not. After Tala defeats the two stormtroopers in the most dumbest way possible, Obi-Wan starts getting shot at by a probe droid and eventually stormtroopers and suddenly remembers how to fight, despite losing his connection to the Force earlier and being decimated by Vader in the process last episode. And you would probably think that this is cool, but it seems like the stormtroopers, one, only shoot at his lightsaber, and two, only shoot when he's facing them. Hell, they even shoot the probe droid by accident. And after defeating the troopers and the probe droid, he does his flourish into his fighting stance, which is meant to get the fans going whoop, 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 whoop. But it means nothing if they continue to destroy everything. At this point, Reva, a purge trooper, and a fire team of stormtroopers are marching majestically, as Kenobi is deflecting bolts with his lightsaber, accidentally shattering the glass that goes into the water because, you know, they're underground. And then we see another purge trooper with a fire team of stormtroopers running towards Kenobi. And I don't know if this is the same one that was following Reva or if this is a separate team, but they don't explain that because Reva's not with them, and I hope it's the latter because it would be stupid if Reva just disappeared for this one segment, you know, when she's trying to hunt down Kenobi. But anyway, back to the fight. Kenobi then deflects one of the blaster bolts into the door panel, which closes the door on the purge trooper and the stormtrooper team that are approaching him, and they try to pull the door open. Meanwhile, Leia points out, Ben, the glass! And then he starts to use the Force miraculously to hold back the sea, despite not being able to lift up a bloody box. A small box the size, like half the size of your hand, he couldn't lift up. Not half an hour ago, but he can push back the sea. Consistency does not exist in Star Wars anymore. And what's worse is that Tala then shows up out of nowhere to take Leia out of the bridge under the water so that she is safe. And then as the stormtroopers and the purge trooper eventually open the door and run towards Kenobi, they don't shoot him and just wait there for him to then pull the sea into all the glass panes to flood them. Kenobi then runs out, and then Tala closes the door, and none of the water gets through, despite the fact that it was right on his ass in the previous shot. None of it. None of the water gets through. They're dry. And trust me, this is not the worst thing to happen. The worst thing happens next, after Tala tells Kenobi to put on a trench coat that was worn by one of the officers he killed. And Tala leads Kenobi and Leia, who is hiding underneath the trench coat, and you can see her feet walking as well, through the entire courtyard of the entire base towards her ship. And no one, not the troopers, not the officers, not the pilots, not the bloody Inquisitors, the fifth brother and fourth sister see him. None of them! Her legs are poking out of the trench coat, and they can't see her either! This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Ever. Don't mistake me for being melodramatic, I'm serious. $25 million per episode. Remember that. And it isn't until Reva shouts traitor, as if it's bloody The Force Awakens, that people realise. And what's worse is that even though the Jedi that they've been looking for, as well as the traitor and the princess that they imprisoned, is standing right there, some of these troopers are just walking around just willy-nilly, as if nothing's happening. As if they want to quickly get to the mess hall for lunch, while the other half of them aim their blasters. So then you're thinking, it's over. They're captured, right? The third sister wins. Well, do you remember when I said that there will be another Deus Ex Machina? The snow speeders arrive from Jabib, you know, to attack the impenetrable base that they are terrified of. At the perfect time. And because there are no turbo laser defenses or shields, because people will be stupid to attack this base, they actually defeat some of the stormtroopers, allowing Kenobi, Tala, and Leia to escape being surrounded by about 30 stormtroopers and 5 purge troopers. Meanwhile, you can see the TIE fighters that don't ever undock to fight the two snowspeeders. Two of the lightest fighters that the Rebel Alliance later will ever have are enough. And so Reva does the chicken walk. Hopefully that will help her catch up to the 3 bloody fugitives. One being the bloody Jedi that she has to catch her or will die because of, before the pilot Wade starts to shoot her with the blasters from the fighter. Reva then has to deflect them as Kenobi, Tala, and Leia get into the fighter that is piloted by Sully, who was the female pilot I mentioned earlier. And then out of nowhere, the fifth brother comes out and says, destroy them! Well, that would have been easy if you had turbo laser defenses in this base. And then Reva, who, despite being dumb on multiple occasions, has the most common sense out of all of them, launches one of the explosives at Wade's fighter and blows him up. And then the fifth brother grunts after looking at Reva and walks away. So that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. It just keeps getting worse. And then the next scene, you see Vader, who I guess has done of his spa day in the Bacta tank, back at his ship, walking into the office where Reva, the fifth brother, and the fourth sister are. He then immediately starts force choking Reva. But before I tell you what happens in the scene, I need to tell you another cinematic issue that I saw. Because, you know, $25 million per episode. Behind Vader, you see two stormtroopers marching in. The first issue is with Vader. In the first close-up shot, you see Vader lift up his arm to force choke Reva. In the wide shot, where you can also see Reva react to this and be pushed backwards to where the table is, he also does exactly the same thing. So the second time he uses the force choke, it's out of time with when Reva moves. This production needs a new editor. And I don't know why the director didn't take multiple shots for this. I've worked on Disney productions before, you take bloody millions, because this is exactly what happens in the last episode with Tala, when she shoots the 3 stormtroopers, remember? The second issue is with the stormtroopers I mentioned before. In one shot, they are only now just coming out of the door that Vader walked past, and then in the next wide shot, they're in position, about 4 meters from where the center of the door is. I could excuse this if there were a bunch of supporting artists / extras walking about, but there's not. There's literally 8 people in this scene. The 4 stormtroopers, Vader, the 5th brother, the 4th sister, and Reva. Reva is suspended on, I assume, are tight ropes to lift her up in the air. You should not be making mistakes like this when there are 8 people on the scene. And you have a $25 million budget per episode. And on the topic of Reva, if you compared the force choke that was done to the man in the village in the last episode to Reva's, it looks much worse here. But anyway, back to the story. Reva explains that she put a tracker on the ship, and that was all part of her plan. Vader lets her down, slowly. After the 5th brother complains that the base was destroyed almost, Reva then says, "Kenobi is all that matters." That grabs Vader's attention and he walks right up to her and says that there can be no mistakes. "You're certain that the tracker is with him?" Reva says, "Yes, my lord. Where he goes, it will follow." And then it cuts to the snowspeeder going onto the ship where they then fly away. You know, on this planet that is literally in Vader's system. You'd think that there'll be ships ready to intercept that, right? A couple Star Destroyers at least. But no, they have no issues just flying away. There's a sad moment where Roken's like, "Where's Wade?" And you see the sad look on the female pilot's face as she goes to sit down. Tala says the most unempathetic thing ever, "You're soldiers now," before getting her some water. Leia and Obi-Wan share a nice happy moment before the camera pans to Lola, the droid, and then you see the light turns red, because it's evil. Turns out that Lola's the tracker. And then the episode ends. But then you had to ask yourself this. If this was Reva's plan, then why did she surround and call out Tala, who was with Kenobi and Leia in the hangar? Maybe you could argue that she did this as a contingency plan, but it seems very contrived. But otherwise, this is probably the least egregious thing in the show, if not one of them. But when paired with the entire episode, this episode objectively is probably what, a 2.5 out of 10? It's just not good, man. And I like it around the same, maybe a 2 out of 10. And after this show finishes, you won't see me paying for Disney Plus, I'll tell you that, man. Because this show has just gotten worse by episode. It started strong and just went downhill. This is exactly what happened for the Book of Boba Fett. It just got worse the more you watched. The Mandalorian to a certain extent, but I'd argue that that show's still much better. All the good elements of the show are just phased out by the mass amounts of bad. It's so badly written now. It started well, and that's like the writer got lazy and it just got worse. The direction is probably some of the worst I've seen in any of the Star Wars live action shows or films since Disney took over. And God help the cinematography and editing for the show. I feel like this portrays the actors in the show in a bad light, because I'd argue that most of the actors in this show are actually very good. But look at the script that they have to work with. It's just not good. And I don't think that they can repair this show. I think the Kenobi show is trash, and it's not going to get better. I just want to see what are they going to mess up next. And that's not what I should be watching this show for. It saddens me. But I might as well get the bang for my buck, Disney Plus, so I will see how this ends. You best know I'm going to have videos on episode 5 and 6. I imagine it's going to be juicy. This is just like Game of Thrones Season 8. It's always the 3rd episode where it goes downhill. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't do an individual episode last week for episode 3, it was because I saw the flaws and I wanted to actually articulate myself well on this, so I waited until episode 4 so I can put them into one video, to save time and to make sure I have a better video that actually details the flaws of this. It's actually much easier to talk on a more off the cuff fashion like I did for episode 1 and 2 with the bubbly one, when things are good. When things get bad, you need to point out the bad. Otherwise you're just seen as nitpicking. So that's what I did. And hopefully I pointed out every single issue. If I haven't, let me know in the comments below. But the benefit of actually seeing how things end and looking back in the past, with actual facts and logic to back up your arguments, is a powerful thing. Hindsight is such a powerful thing.